The Cabinet held on the 1st of October 2024. Can I welcome our new member as well, Will Price. Congratulations, Will, and welcome to your first meeting here in Ruthin. Thank you. This meeting has been webcast with the exception of any business that the Cabinet resolves to exclude the press and public because the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by the Local Government Act 1972. This meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with Cabinet members attending in purpose at the Council Chamber, County Hall, Ruthin, or remotely via video conference. For transparency purposes, I'll ask the monitoring officer to identify which Cabinet members are in attendance and whether they are attending in person or remotely.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, Cabinet members attending in person are the Leader, Councillor Jason McClellan, Councillor Julie Matthews, Deputy Leader, also Cabinet members Councillor Ellen Heaton, Councillor Barry Mellor, Councillor Alan James, Councillor Emrys Wynne, Councillor Diane King, and Councillor Rhys Thomas, all present in the Chamber. In addition, in the Chamber, we have non-Cabinet members who are observing the meeting, and they are Councillors Justine Evans, Will Price, Brian Jones, Pauline Edwards, Terry Mendes, Andrea Tomlin, Karen Edwards, Hugh Hilditch Roberts, Bobby Feely, Hugh Williams, and Mervyn Parry. We also have attending online as observers, non-Cabinet members, Councillors Carol Holliday, Martin Hogg, Joan Butterfield, James Elson, and Cheryl Williams. Also in attendance in the Chamber and online are officers who are supporting the meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Those attending remotely are kindly asked to mute their microphones unless they are called upon to speak. Cabinet members will also have their videos switched on throughout the meeting unless I specifically request to turn your video off to improve the quality of the audio link when you are speaking. You will be expected to restart your video once you have finished speaking. Please also refrain from using the chat facility as messages sent to all are visible on the webcast. Those present in the chamber are asked to make sure that they speak directly into the microphone to improve the quality of the sound for those attending remotely. To aid transparency, all of the meeting's business must be conducted through the chair. I'll hand over to Gary for declaration of interest, but we have had one apology. Councillor Gwyneth Ellis has offered her apologies today. Thank you. So, Gary, declarations of interest.
Diolch, Mr Arweinydd. Bydd aelodau'n ymwybodol o'r gyfyniad o dan god ymddygiad y cyngor I ddatgan unrhyw gysylltiad personol neu sy'n rhagfarnu mewn perthynas ag unrhyw busnes i'w ystyried yn y cyfarfod heddiw. Dylai cysylltiadau o'r fath gael eu datgelu nawr neu gyntad y bydd y cynghorydd yr effeithir arnynt yn ymwybodol fod ganddynt gysylltiad personol neu sy'n rhagfarnu yn y materion heddiw. Mae'n ofynnol I holl aelodau sy'n datgan cysylltiad I nodi'n glir beth yw'r cysylltiad ac I hysbysu pa un a yw'n gysylltiad personol neu'n gysylltiad personol sy'n rhagfarnu fel y diffinwydd yn y cod ymddygiad. Mae'n ofynnol I unrhyw aelod sy'n datgan cysylltiad sy'n rhagfarnu adael y cyfarfod yn ystod y drafodaeth ac ni allid cymryd rhan mewn unrhyw drafodion. Gall aelodau ddiddordeb personol yn unig gymryd rhan yn y drafodaeth ac unrhyw bleidlais. Os bydd cysylltiad personol sy'n rhagfarnu yn cael ei ddagelu heddiw nad yw wedi ei ddagelu a'i gofnodi yn blaenorol, bydd yn ofynnol i'r cynghorydd dan sylw lenwi a llofnodi ffurflen datgan cysylltiad sydd yn ei ar gael gan staff cefnogi'r pwyllgor sy'n bresennol heddiw neu ar-lein.
Diolch, Gary. Okay. Do we have any declarations of interest in relation to today's meeting? No? Okay, so we will move to the one and only substantive item, and that is to a decision on the additional resources required to ensure that the waste system is on a sustainable and workable footing going forward. So I'm welcoming Tony, who will join us, and at this stage I'll hand over to the lead member and then Tony. So lead member Barry, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This report is about the new waste service that we implemented earlier this summer. On the 3rd of June, we moved to a weekly household recycling collection with a trolley box curbside sort system instead of the previous fortnightly commingled recycling system using the blue wheelie bin. The first thing I want to say is that we all accept that the service hasn't worked as we hoped it would. Myself and the Leader have publicly apologised to residents about that, and we have committed to addressing the issues and to make sure that the new system will work. We also need to understand why it didn't work and what lessons we can learn from the planning and implementation of the future transformation projects. However, today is not that day for debating the reasons why it didn't work. There will be a member-led scrutiny review, and I know that discussions are currently taking place to agree the terms of reference for that review. I want to stress that I welcome that review, and I also want to say that it will be important for our residents to have an opportunity to be involved in that process too. This report is specifically, excuse me, about what needs to be done to address the issues that have emerged and to make sure that the new recycling system works. Before I go on to talk about what needs to be done to put the service on a sustainable footing, I just want to reflect briefly on what has happened over the past 4 months. As soon as the new system was introduced, we saw that many of the new recycling rounds were failing to complete their daily collections. This resulted in large and unacceptable numbers of missed collections and lots of uncollected waste on our streets. We responded to that situation by quickly allocating additional temporary resources to address the problem. This meant spending more money on overtime for our staff, additional agency staff, and additional hired vehicles. Nobody ever wants to spend additional money, but it was the right thing to do for the residents of Denbighshire at that time. It also worked. Although I accept we still have some specific issues with properties that are not getting a consistent service, we are not in the position that we were in towards the end of June, with large scale and widespread issues with missed collections across the county. The temporary additional resources to support the recycling rounds obviously came at a cost. But as per paragraph 4.14 in the report, the total additional cost for 24-25 will be offset by a one-off receipt from the North Wales Residual Waste Treatment Partnership that we have with other councils. Therefore, there is no budget pressure this financial year due to the introduction of the additional temporary resources to support our recycling rounds. However, we do need to put a permanent solution in place to enable the service to be successful and sustainable in the long term. That is what this report is about. In a nutshell, it's clear that insufficient resources were allocated to the recycling rounds during the planning phase of this change project. There were simply not enough recycling rounds planned into the design of the service to collect from the 46,000 households across the county every week. There is no avoiding the fact that the permanent solution we need to put in place requires allocating additional resources to the service. That's an uncomfortable truth, but it's reality of the situation we face. We need to take a decision to provide a permanent solution and to put the new service on a sustainable footing. And the proposal in this paper provides that permanent solution. If we don't make a decision to formally allocate additional resources to the service, we will either have to keep allocating temporary additional resources, which is inefficient and more expensive than the proposed permanent solution, or we remove the temporary additional resources, which will result in large numbers of missed collections again, with no way of catching up. Leader, neither of these options can be supported. That is why I'm recommending today that we make a formal decision to allocate permanent additional resources to the service. I'm now going to hand over to the Corporate Director, Tony Ward, who will talk a little bit more about the detail of the proposal put in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Mellor. Penanda Paub. As Councillor Mellor has said, I'm going to try and put a little bit more detail around the issues that Councillor Mellor raised. The new recycling service included 20 recycling rounds each day. And that model was based on a number of assumptions. For example, the number of properties that could be collected per hour, the amount of recycling that residents would present for collection, bit of feedback, and also how much recycling would fit into each vehicle. Those assumptions led to the conclusion that we would need 20 recycling rounds per day for the 46,000 households in the county. Those assumptions proved to be incorrect. As a result, many of the rounds had too many houses on them, and the rounds therefore could not complete. That means that we didn't design enough recycling rounds into the new service, and we didn't put enough resources into that service. The only way to address that is to reduce the number of properties on some of the recycling rounds, and that means that we need to increase the number of recycling rounds from the 20 per day that were originally planned. So having reassessed the assumptions in light of our experience following the rollout, the number of recycling rounds actually required ranges from 26 to 28 per day, depending on the day of the week. To provide the correct number of rounds, we therefore need to buy additional recycling vehicles and employ additional drivers and loaders. Specifically, that means 8 additional vehicles of various sizes and specifications, 8 drivers and 11 loaders. The vehicles are estimated to cost approximately £1.3 million to purchase, so we are asking Cabinet to approve that capital spend today, which would be funded by prudential borrowing. It's important to note that we will be making a formal request to Welsh Government for additional support to help with that capital spend. And any support we receive will obviously reduce our capital spend and would also therefore reduce the amount of prudential borrowing required to fund it. We're also asking Cabinet to approve an additional £1.067 million of revenue to cover the revenue cost of that prudential borrowing to purchase the vehicles, but also to cover the day-to-day running costs of those vehicles and the cost of the additional drivers and loaders needed for those additional recycling rounds. That revenue pressure of just over £1 million will need to go into the medium-term financial plan, along with all other service pressures, and will need to be addressed via the budget setting process for 2025-26. If Cabinet support the proposals today, we can start planning to implement the revised recycling rounds, and we would hope to have them in place within weeks, i.e. during October. We're confident that these new rounds provide the permanent solution to the problems we've been seeing, and that this decision will enable the service to become sustainable again. I'm going to leave it there, Leader, for now, and open it up to questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so thank you both, Barry and Tony, for setting out the position very clearly there. Okay, I'll open it for questions. Julie.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Barry. Just want to ask Tony, what particular evidence have you got to reassure us that the additional resources needed as set out in this report are adequate to get this back on a sustainable footing? What I'm concerned about is we don't want to be back here in another 3 months if, you know, the additional rounds aren't enough. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Important question, obviously. There's a lot of work has gone in to revisiting the model over the past couple of months. What we have now that we didn't have before is the experience of about what's happened since the rollout. So prior to the change, despite a huge amount of work going on in planning the service, everything is a theoretical model until it's been rolled out. What we now have is the experience of what actually happened following the rollout, and we can see exactly what's happening every single day on every single recycling round. So we can see exactly which rounds have been doing okay, which ones have been quite close to finishing, which ones have been quite a long way away. And we can also examine the reasons why that's the case in quite a lot of detail. So we're working on the basis of real evidence of what this service is like in real life, rather than basing it on assumptions, which was the case prior to the rollout. So I think that gives us a lot of confidence that this permanent solution will work. That there's a risk in any change, and this is another change, although it is a much smaller change than the change we implemented in June. So again, that gives us confidence that this change can be managed and managed successfully. We know that when there's any change implemented, that brings risks, and there is a risk with any change that can lead to some issues. We're confident that we've got the plan in place to deal with those issues quickly and successfully, so that this new service, as I say, hits the ground running and is a success. But it's largely because we've got that experience under our belts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Rita. Tony, you've mentioned risks there, and this is the direction I was going to go in my questioning as well. I accept what you say, that if there's any new project, if there's any new scheme anywhere, there will always be risks. You can never be sure that something will happen. Some members said that Denbighshire wasn't building many council homes and affordable homes. Well, in order to venture into that field, there are risks. There are financial risks when you do that. There are risks of opposition from individuals. So there are risks in everything that you do. Don't you agree? There are risks. You say that you're now in a better position. So my question would be, when officers looked at this situation over the last number of years, I've been on the council since 2017, and very soon after that, as a local member, with the waste centre being built in Denby, we were involved at a very, very early stage. I could talk at length about that, about the benefits that having that station in Denby has brought, the fact that we've managed to keep 4 businesses in Denby that might well have been attracted to other places. Those businesses have expanded, they've increased the number of staff. I imagine that any local member from Denby who's in the room today will support the fact that there's been employment for local people and keeping businesses in Denby. But let's get back to this risk that you were talking about. These risks were faced many years ago when these rounds were thought about and were designed. So what new input is there now? I'm just concerned that it may be more or less the same people looking at the risks now as looked at the risks before. What advance has been made over that? Is there extra assistance being given? Can you just, it's very similar to the question you've just answered there, but if you can be more specific, how can we now have more faith in this model that is being put before us? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Rhys, for your question. To some extent, clearly there are similarities in terms of the team of people who have put this plan together. It's a Denbighshire Council service ultimately, so the service has to take responsibility for owning that process, taking advice from other parties, but it is a council service. Although the people involved in the service have changed over time. You know, when this was first discussed and this project was put together was in 2018. So there have been a lot of management changes within the waste service in that time. So we do have some different people on board. We have still been taking advice from RAP Cymru, who bring a lot of have a lot of experience in planning and implementing and running waste services. But we also have had some input from other external people as well, officers from neighbouring local authorities. We've asked, and they've kindly contributed by having a look at our assumptions and our model. It's really just about having a different set of eyes on this, so that because you know sometimes you can get very close to a project, so it's always good to have an external set of eyes. But I said at the end of the day, it's a Denbighshire Council service, so we have to be responsible for it because we have to run that service. So we have to be very clear that we understand the basis for the model and we have to be comfortable with it. So we do have to take that ownership. I said the biggest difference on top of what I've just said is what I just said earlier about the experience of running this curbside sort model since June. As I say, we've seen in great detail every day what's happened on the ground. So we've got a great deal of evidence to base the changes that we've made to the recycling rounds. It's gone down to a very micro level, looking at every single specific round on every single day, to make sure that we believe that those rounds will be manageable under this new model. These revised rounds that we've got, and I have to say not all of the rounds will have changed. Some of the rounds have worked since day one, and we don't plan to change things that are working already. It's about focusing on the rounds that haven't worked and making sure that we do something about those. So we're not throwing everything up in the air again and starting from scratch. It's around modifying the things that didn't work in the new model. I hope that helps, Rhys.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Can I just again seek clarity on one or two of those things that you mentioned there? You mentioned that RAP is now working closely with Denbighshire. Were they working as closely with Denbighshire before, with the scheme which wasn't as successful? You also mentioned discussing with other LEAs. Had we not been doing that before, or is there more input this time? I think the third thing I'm going to ask is, what you're really saying there, correct me if I'm wrong, is that as with any new project, you're learning from your mistakes. So is that what you mean this time, that you're learning from that? So RAP, other LEAs, and learning from the mistakes made previously. Thank you, Tony.
Okay. Yes, it's fair to say RAP Cymru are much more involved with the service now than they ever were during the planning phase of the project previously. I say that because their role has changed in recent months, and they are providing actual operational management support in the service, because we've got a management deficiency at the moment, because we had our operations manager left the council. Our new operations manager's actually now started, but we had a gap there for a couple of months. So RAP Cymru have been providing operational management support as well as advice to the service, was their role previously. was just as advisors to the council on this project. So they're still providing advice and guidance on the project and the redesign of the rounds. However, they have also been involved in supporting the management of the service over the last few months. So I think, without speaking on their behalf, I think it's probably fair to say that they fully understand the issues that we've been having with the rollout of the new service as much as we are, because they've actually been involved in helping to manage that service with us. So I think that's a positive thing. I think that's a helpful thing. And we really thank RAP Cymru for their ongoing support. It's very much appreciated. We did always try to learn lessons from other local authorities who have been through this process before. That was always part of the project, if you like, to seek that lessons learned and experiences from others, because we're not the first authority to have done this. In fact, you know, we're one of the last to go about this kind of change. I think what's been different this time is we've actually asked for some support in a much more detailed way, actually looking, asking some other operational managers from other authorities to take a look at the detail behind our rounds. That's not something that I believe we did before. It was very much just kind of general learning lessons from other authorities in the past. And apologies, Reece, your third question was learning. I would say we have definitely learned from the experiences of the past 4 months. We can't not do that. You know, we've been living and breathing this every day for the past 4 months. The reality of the rollout of this service, and we've learned a lot. So that's fundamentally crucial to the success of these redesigned rounds, the fact that we've got that experience and we've learned from that experience. It's yeah, absolutely crucial, Reece. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I've got quite a few more questions, Leader, but I'll leave that for now. Let's go around the table.
Julie? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Leader. I've got a few questions as well, Tony, but I'll just stick to the one burning one. Is in terms of the wellbeing impact assessment. If we can go to that. Page 25 talks about a range of options given to support residents with disabilities. But I don't think they were how this is like, let's have the reset from today. Moving forward, what are we going to do to support residents if they need to access those options? I think the other thing I was thinking about as well is we do have an aging population. So what are we going to do to ensure that it doesn't have any sort of future impact on the budget if there is increased demand? I think we've learnt previously that there are a lot of people who may need assisted collections that we weren't aware of previously, for example. So it's all about getting that message out to residents, really, what we're going to do to make sure that our residents do get the support that they need in terms of their own requirements, so that we can make this scheme a success in terms of the recycling and meeting the targets and whatever. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. In general terms, on the point about future impacts on budgets because of increased demand, I think it was really one of the reasons for introducing this change, that this new model helps us to do that, because the demand on the service was always increasing for various reasons, whether that be an increase in the number of households in the county with new houses being built all the time, so our population increases, but also the cost of dealing with the commingled recycling was going up and up and up, and had done for a number of years, and showed no signs of reducing. So in terms of the future impact on budget, that was one of the benefits of moving towards this, that it removes some of those things that are outside of our control and moves them to within our control. So we couldn't control the cost of the commingled recycling continuing to increase. And we've now removed that element because we're collecting the sorting, recycling, and selling it ourselves to the market. Again, the market for that material is somewhat out of our control as well, but it's more in our control, because what we can control, or try to control, is the quantity but also the quality of the material that we collect by education, and by further education over time. We hope that the quality of the recycling will continue to improve, so that that element of the budget is within our control. In terms of the impact assessment and additional support and bespoke solutions for individuals, which I think was the question you were getting at there. What I expect is that once we get these new rounds introduced, if Cabinet support the proposal today, that we can get this service settled down again to a place where it's running as business as usual. That gives us all and everybody in the service the capacity to deal with those kind of bespoke conversations that might need to take place with individual residents. Things have been pretty hectic for the service, I think that's fair to say, over the past 4 months. So it's been a real challenge for them to try and make sure the recycling collections are completed every day. We need to get that back on a solid footing, so that people have got more time to deal with those really important issues that we need to resolve for people if they need to have a different solution, whatever that might be, to suit their individual circumstances. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That does help, actually. But just a follow-up question, really, on those sort of bespoke solutions, really, because you're talking about, yeah, obviously, once everything all settles down and whatever, but what sort of messaging will we be saying to residents if they need to access that bespoke service? Who would they speak to? Would it be our customer service in the first instance, and then would one of your team follow that up?
Yeah.
Just to make sure we're getting it right for people.
It would
Thank
be,
you.
as with any other service, it would be to contact customer services initially, and that will then obviously then filter through to the service, and the team will be able to have a look at those things. I mean, the service has been dealing with some of those issues over the first 4 months, but I recognise that it's been a challenge to probably do as much as the service needed to do because of the pressure and demand on everybody over that time. But yeah, customer services is definitely the way to log those issues.
Just one other question. So as councillors, we can probably support you with getting those messages out to people if they need that sort of support.
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
we would appreciate that.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Emrys?
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Gadeirydd, a diolch Tony am yr adroddiad. Cwestiwn sgen i ydy am hyn fydd yn digwydd os da ni'n mynd i dderbyn y cynllun busnes newydd yma heddiw. Ar wahân i weld bod yr gwastraff a'r ailgylchu'n cael ei gasglu ar y dyddiau cywir ag ati, oes yna unrhyw newidiadau eraill yn mynd i fod efo'r casgliadau? Hynny ydy, oes yna newidyddiadau mynd i fod? Neu oes yna newid yn y drefn o pa funiau sy'n cael ei casglu pa bryd? Achos ond y lawer o lenyddiaeth allan cyn cychwyn y drefn newydd yma, yn egluro'n fanwl sut y bob dim yn gweithio. A fydd angen rhagor o lenyddiaeth tebyg mwyn gweithredu yr cynllun busnes newydd yma da ni'n drafod rwan.
Diolch, Emrys. No, there are no changes planned to the service as far as the residents are concerned. The only difference will be, the intended difference will be that those people who have had a challenging time because they've had an inconsistent service will start to see a consistent service and see that their recycling will be collected on their scheduled day, which won't change. It won't change from their current day. So all the changes are kind of behind the scenes. Residents won't notice that difference, apart from, as I said, a better service for those people who have had an inconsistent service so far. Those people who are having a regular, consistent service already will just continue to see the same. So there'll be no changes to the recycling collection day.
Yeah, okay. Any more questions? Ellen, did you want to come in?
Diolch Arweinydd. Thank you. What we don't want to lose sight of is the environmental benefits of this system. Whilst understandably a lot of the focus has been on the finances, you know, as a council, it's important that not only are we being financially sustainable, we're being environmentally sustainable too. And it seems that this proposal will help us to achieve both. So I do suppose it's early days, Tony, but I wonder, when are we to expect an update on how we're doing with the new trolley block system in terms of meeting the 70% recycling target?
Okay, thank you, Ellen. You're absolutely right. That was the reason we introduced this new model in the first place, was to help us get to the 70% statutory recycling target. You're right, it's a little bit early to tell at the moment, although the initial signs look promising. The first quarter of this financial year was obviously, we still had the old collection method at that point, so April to start of June. So we will only have a partial benefit of the new model this financial year when we come to you know, tot up the performance at the end of the year, and then the full benefit for every year thereafter. But so we've had the quarter 2 of this financial year has been using the new model, and as I said, it's quite early days in actually determining the exact figures. But from what we can see over the first 4 months, the amount of recycling that we're collecting and the value of it seems consistent with what we were projecting it would be before we changed. Therefore, I'm still confident that this model will help us to get to the 70% statutory target. As I say, it's just a little bit early days on that score, but it's still looking very positive.
Just to say thank you, that's really reassuring to hear, and it shows it has been the right choice to implement this model, and I look forward to seeing the data when it's available.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Tony. Okay, any further? Reece, did you want to come back in? Alan, sorry, Alan, you've indicated that some chattering at the back that's distracting.
There's chattering going on at the back, so it is quite
yeah, PK,
disturbing.
you're all together and you'll need to have a
Please.
chat. Just turn the volume down a little. Thanks very much. For those at the back, particularly if Tony's speaking, he's at the back as well. Thanks. Please.
Diolch Arweinydd. Cwpl o gwestiynau I Tony. Na I ofyn yr un cynta yn Gymraeg. Cyn y newid drosodd i'r system TROLIBOCS, a oedd na gorwario yn y gwasanaeth casglu sbwriel? Ydy hi'n hawdd I ddweud faint oedd y drefn yn costio o'r blaen? Falle bod hi ddim yn hawdd I ddweud hynny. Felly, oedd gennon ni ryw syniad o beth oedd y gorwario yn y drefn cyn I ni fynd drosodd at y system newydd, ac fel mae y cynghorydd Elen wedi dweud, dach chi gyd yn gwybod mod I yn awyddus iawn I fod ni fel cyngor yn gwneud pob dim dyn ni'n gallu ar gyfer ailgylchu ar amgylchedd ac yn y blaen, a dwi'n gwybod yn y cyngor o'r blaen roedden ni'n unfrydol bod ni o blaid y polisia sydd yn gwella pethau at genedlaethau sy'n dod. Felly, just y cwestiwn cyntaf di hyn, oedd na orwario a faint oedd o? Diolch yn fawr.
I think Liz might want to join me in terms of the answer to this question, but essentially the answer is yes. There was a budget pressure on the waste service prior to the rollout. The budget for the waste service was about 7.2 million in 23-24. And the actual cost of the service was about £8 million in 23-24. So there was a budget pressure of about 800,000 is the reality. I don't know, Liz, if there's anything you wanted to add specifically in terms of detail on that.
Na, ddim byd i ychwanegu. Mae Tony di ateb y cwestiwn. So'r gyllideb ar gyfer gwastraff, tîm gwastraff yn 7.2 miliwn ac roedd y gwariant flwyddyn diwetha'n 8 miliwn, so yna o'r wariant o 800,000.
Okay, diolch yn fawr, Liz. My second question here, when I first came on the council, this commingled waste was bringing in quite a tidy sum of money, as they say in South Wales. There's quite a tidy sum of money was coming in. And I seem to remember a figure, I might be wrong, it's a while ago, but £50 a tonne or something. We were, I'm sure it's not that, but that's the figure I've got in my head. How much were we getting by the last financial year for that? In what direction was that profit from our commingled waste going? Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Rhys. Again, I can't quite remember the amount of income we used to receive, and I don't know whether Liz has that information, but you're right. When we did used to receive an income for the commingled recycling when we first introduced that system. However, that wasn't the case by the time I became the head of service. I can tell you that in 2018-19, we weren't receiving an income. It was costing us £315,000 a year by that point to pay somebody to treat our commingled recycling. And by 23-24, that had increased to 1.1 million. So it went from, it used to bring in an income to it was costing us 1.1 million. So a very big change in the financial position. And that was only going one way, and that was only going to continue. So that's, from a financial perspective, that was a huge risk to the service and therefore the council in terms of budget pressure. We've removed that risk now by changing to this model because we don't have to pay anybody to sort and treat our commingled recycling for us anymore. In fact, we get an income for it, for the recycling, and
well, that was going to be my next question. Do we have any indication yet? I've seen in the document that, I'm sorry to have interrupted you, I've seen in the document how many tons of cardboard, how many tons of paper, tons of glass, tons of plastic, tons of metal. I've seen that, but is it possible as yet to put some sort of figure on what we're spending or what we're getting for that? Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, it certainly can. So in the first 3 months of the new model, we sold 1,707 tonnes of recycling material for a total value of approximately £250,000. So that's the kind of level of income that we are already receiving by selling the sorted recycling.
So that's £250,000 in the first quarter.
That's correct.
We had in for that. Is that a fixed sum? Is that something that we can project forward for the next 12 months?
We have projected what we expected to receive in income over the year, but the value in the market fluctuates all the time. So we have had to do a model to project what it will be. Our projection was around about £1 million a year. So £250,000 over the first quarter is consistent with what we thought we would achieve, and it's a positive sign that those predictions are looking quite accurate at this stage.
Okay, diolch Tony, thank you Tony. I'll leave it there, Lido.
Please. Julie?
Okay, thank you, Tony. So in terms of what you're asking for the ongoing costs of just over £1 million, we could perhaps tentatively look at that as being offset against what we're selling in terms of the recycled material overall. Or is that too simple a view of
No,
things?
I think what we can say is that because we've moved from the previous model, we're protecting ourselves from the continued increased cost of dealing with the commingled recycling. So that 315,000 in 18-19, which was 1.1 million in 23-24, would have continued to increase and would have been an additional financial pressure on the service year on year. So the service would have had to have been coming to Liz every year and asking for more and more money for the every year for the old recycling model, because that cost would have continued to increase. What we can do is obviously that we get income from the recycling. So the more recycling we can collect and the better quality it is, we can increase the income. So hitting the 70% target isn't only important because it's a statutory target and we could get fined from Welsh Government if we fail to achieve it. The higher we go above that, the more income we receive. So it's within all of our benefits. Yeah, that's how we can start to recoup some of this money, is by improving the recycling rates and improving the quality of the recycling.
Okay, thanks. Liz, I could see you nodding there. Do you want to come in? Anything to add?
Yeah, so it's avoiding future cost pressures, particularly around the a possibility of Welsh Government fines. You know, when we were looking at it, the fine could be 250,000 based on where we didn't get to the targets last year. You know, it's if, isn't it? If that were to happen, but certainly from discussions with Welsh Government, that's where the direction of travel, if we weren't looking to improve our recycling rates, which is what the project was all about.
Thank you. Okay. Any further questions? No? Okay. Julie, yeah. That's fine. It's, you know, it's an important decision we're making here.
Yeah,
We've
okay.
got to ask the questions and raise the challenge.
Yeah, you did mention Welsh Government earlier and that you've approached them for some additional capital funding. So have we already done that? Have you already approached them? Is there any indication of the potential outcome of that at all?
What we're really waiting for is a decision from Cabinet today, so that we have got authority to purchase the vehicles, and then we will make a formal approach to Welsh Government for a capital contribution to that. So no, I can't answer that question at the moment, I'm afraid.
Sorry, can I just ask one more thing about, so it's all around any equality monitoring in terms of the number of requests for AHP and assisted collections moving forward. Will you be taking, do you keep stats on that, Tony? And if you do, can that be shared with members at all?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly got some quite recent data on the AHP element, because obviously we've just recently reopened for registrations again for the AHP service. So we've got very recent data on that. Those applications are still coming in at the moment, and we're working through them. In terms of assisted collections, we have been writing to residents to ask them to confirm that an assisted collection is still required at that household. People who have had that service for more than 2 or 3 years, I think it was the basis for writing to people. So, because we want to make sure that the service is still required everywhere where it's being provided, because it obviously does take additional resource to implement that. So again, we are collecting some updated information about that at the moment. Happy to share that once we've collated that information, Julia.
Emrys.
Ie, diolch yn fawr. Un cwestiwn. Pe byddwn ni yn derbyn y cynllun busnes newydd yma heddiw, pa wahaniaeth fydd trigolion Sir Ddinbych yn cael i'w gweld yn y tymor byr ac hefyd yn y tymor hirach? Rhaid i mi fod yn hollol agored efo pawb. Dydyn ni'n mynd i gael y lorïau wageni newydd dros nos. Bydd rhaid aros iddyn nhw'n cael i'w darparu a'i gwerthu. Fel oedd yr cabinet dwytha wedi gorfod gwneud, ond nhw'n aros am y wageni ac i gyflogi ag ati yn seiliedig ar eu cynllun busnes diffygiol nhw. Ond, dyn ni'n sicr tro yma y bydd modd erbyn diwedd y flwyddyn yma gobeithio fyddwn ni'n gweld gwahaniaeth sylweddol yn y drefn, a gobeithio erbyn dechrau'r flwyddyn nesaf fydd bob dim yn ôl yn ei le fel dylai hi fod.
Okay, diolch Emrys. As I said earlier, I think for the vast majority of residents, they won't see a difference because we are completing our recycling collections for the vast majority of people every day and every week now. So they will see no difference. They will still see that they're getting their recycling collected every week on their scheduled day. What for those people who have had an inconsistent service, they will see a difference because we will be providing that consistent service across the whole of the county. That's the purpose of this request today, to enable us to get to that position and this to just become business as usual, day-to-day operation. Now, I'm not going to say that that means that we'll never, ever have any miscollections, that nobody will ever have a miscollection ever again, because that's an unrealistic promise to make. Every waste service has miscollections. Denbighshire always had miscollections prior to this rollout, and every council in the country will tell you that they have miscollections. That just happens with a service of this scale. That always happens for various reasons, and we've got the evidence to back that up. We're in Denbighshire. We've had a look at the data from customer services from the start of this year. So from the 1st of January this year up until the start of June, we had on average every week more than 120 miscollections, people reporting miscollections to us. So that always happened. It was never headline news because the numbers were reasonably manageable and the service dealt with them as a day-to-day business as usual situation. That's what we need to get back to. So I'm not going to say that there'll never be miscollections. What we need to get to is that position we're in before, where the miscollections happened, but the numbers were manageable and the service was therefore able to deal with them. So that's what we will need to get back to, and that's what this is going to help us to do.
Thanks, diolch Emrys. Thanks, Tony. Okay. Okay, no further. Oh yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
Tony. I've just thought about something else it's come up in the wellbeing impact assessment as well, because it is noted that quality jobs for the long term, and it is acknowledged about manual handling implications, because for staff, fundamentally, the job has changed for some staff, hasn't it? And there has been retraining and whatever. But you do notice something, manual handling implications of the curbside sort system presenting a barrier to older operatives. But that could include other operatives as well, couldn't it, regardless of age, if they're finding that a challenge. So it notes something around the council's career pathway to support other older operatives or perhaps other operatives as well. So what does that entail? Because I suppose what I'm thinking about is if people might do the job for a few months and then find it's actually quite physically demanding on them as time moves on. So are there options for staff to be redeployed within that service in other roles? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you're right. The job's different to what it was before. It's always been a physically demanding job, to be honest. I know because I've done it, not every day, but I've done it. Back to the floor stuff when I was head of service. So it's always been a physical job, but it is a different one. There's been a lot of work undertaken in terms of safe ways of working, risk assessments, and also training for staff. So we've done all the right things, and but you're right, there are opportunities both within the service and outside of the service, actually, for people who decide that this job isn't for them for whatever reason. Actually, if somebody was in that position, we'd look to work with them to identify other potential opportunities. There are lots of different roles within the waste service, but there are also lots of different roles within Paul Jackson's wider highways and environmental service, and the council as a whole. So we wouldn't just kind of limit it to a small section of the council if somebody felt that the role wasn't for them anymore. Also, we're trying to encourage people to upskill, because within this role here now, you can see in this proposal today, we're looking for a number of additional drivers. Now, it may be that there are people who are currently working as loaders in the service who are working towards getting their qualifications to become a driver, because we are trying to encourage upskilling staff, and that's a continuous process, because those opportunities do exist and they will always exist for people. So we want people to move on onto different things, as I say, just doing the same role forever.
Thank you, Tony. Good to know there's staff development opportunities alongside this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so no further questions from Cabinet. Other speakers, I've got Councillor YCHWANEGOL and Terry.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you. I just want to focus on the paper, really, that's in front of us. And I think, in my simple terms, this is a paper that 18 weeks ago, a scheme was rolled out. It has failed. And we're here now with a paper to put more money to sort the scheme out, which is the simple. And I use Jason's words. He said the other week, he said to me, it's easy to be in opposition. It is when everything's going well, but not when we have to face the brunt of it. And in opposition, you can get frustrated. And what I find really frustrated is that I'm sat here being told by officers that the rollout was all based on assumptions. And we hope that this will work. Assumptions is the mother of all mistakes. And the fact that there's no metrics behind that. So I take it that as a cabinet, with the exception of Tony, you and Graham as CEO, you can answer how many collections per hour we will be doing on the new wagons, how much recycling you can do per day on these wagons, how many times each wagon will be emptied, what the cost will be each journey backwards and forwards. I suppose that work has been done, because to use Emrys Wynn's quote, this is a business plan. Unfortunately, I don't see this as a business plan. I see this as a paper asking that we need some more money to try and fix a blister that's popped. But yet, I can't tell you when that blister is going to get better, because we don't know if Welsh Government will contribute. We don't know when the lorries will be available. We don't know when the staff are available. So we don't actually know when there is a benchmark. The only benchmark that Barry's mentioned back in the day, Barry, was 12 weeks with a rapid tell us that we will be judged on then. And that's the benchmark that we had. We talk about risks. We don't know what they are totally at the moment, but yet, Tony, you can project to me how much recycling we'll do. Project, I think the word you used before, in a year. So you are being asked as a cabinet to endorse this paper for more income and more revenue to support the model. And remember, this doesn't even include green waste, general waste. We've had a lady be picked up today in Denby who's had 118 nappies. She's disabled and hasn't had a collection. It's only the second collection she's had since the rollout. There are fundamental bigger issues than just this paper, but I'll keep it on this paper. But the facts I can give you, to quote Delith, is that the model in front of you that is being re-looked at is a model based on assumptions and not metrics. And that is a fundamental flaw, because the metrics have not been shared with you as cabinet, as far as I can see, because it's not in the paper, and it's not shared with other councillors. And I think Jason and Barry, fair dues, have acknowledged that and have said that it was a failure under their watch, and the costs are still out of control because we don't have a timeline of when lorries and this new scheme can be put in place. We still don't know what that cost would be. Graham Bowes said to me in the group's leaders that I was sensationalising when I was quoting a 3 million figure about the cost expiring. Well, actually, Graham, it's creeping up. It's over 2 million now. It's creeping up regularly. So maybe if you just look at the figures a bit closer, it's a lot closer to the figure I was quoting than the ones you were quoting. And I think I do have a little bit of a itch with celebrating the windfall. With 1.2 million, I mean, again, Liz, I'm not sure how much we've actually paid into that scheme as an authority would be my question.
So the annual payment to Parc Adfer is 2.1 million.
Okay, so we've given 2.1 million and we're celebrating we're having 1.2 million back. That's the level of detail that we need to be looking at in this authority. I also think that, you know, the fact that it's here before cabinet does take admittance that there is an issue. But I'm just concerned that we're week 18, and I know it's difficult. This is nothing, not personal, Tony, but I can't ask Tony, tell me what day that the bins will be back to 100 missed collections a week or whatever it is. Because we had the collection service, and in 12 years as a councillor, I never had a single complaint on the bins. And I can handle, the only issue I've ever had was that somebody pinched my own bin and I had to get a replacement. So I just think we need to understand what level of accountability as a cabinet you have here in supporting this, because I would suggest that supporting a fully costed piece of work, a fully costed business plan with timelines, because you're spending that money anyway, Rhys. So if you're prepared to gamble £1 million odd on you don't know the facts and figures, that's something you've got to live with, if it's that funny. So I just think that we need to be really sharp on that going forward. The question is, what's the other plan? You haven't got any other plan. You haven't been costed. But Barry's mentioned that the blue bins is not an option to come back. Well, how much does that cost, Barry?
The blue bins is not an option to go back. This is Welsh Government that would give the indication that we've got to get our figures up to 70% recycling. We were hitting about 60%, nowhere near it. Well, all right, 66, but we're nowhere near the 70%. And
so 4% costing us 2 million.
We were getting £25 a tonne. I'll give you the figures, £25 a tonne a few years ago for the mixed recycling. It was costing us £91 a tonne to get rid of it. That was unsustainable. Unsustainable. We had to go to a proper recycling system. Yes, it's not worked as we like to do. Tell us what we should do, Hugh. Tell us what we should do.
I just told you, Barry.
What?
I said you should have a fully costed plan with a timeline that tells you when you've got a benchmark that you'll be at a level of 100 houses minimum will only have a miscollection. That's what you can't tell me. You can't tell me when you're going to get the wagons, and you can't tell me when you're going to get the staff. So what I'm saying to you is, in principle, we've got to do something. I get that, but this is a figure that doesn't have the metrics behind it. That's my thing. It's not in opposition to what you're doing, because it's a mess and it needs sorting. But what I'm saying is, get some science behind your figures to support you, because that's your role as a cabinet, a corporate role, to take corporate decisions that do not harm the council. And that's what I'm asking you to do your due diligence on this decision before you sign up to something that doesn't have a timeline.
I would strongly disagree with your assumption that this is not a detailed plan to put this service on a sustainable footing. The assumptions that were made and were wrong in June of this year were assumptions made in a business case signed by a cabinet in which you were on. And I'm not having any groaning and moaning in this cabinet. We'll treat each other with respect. Those assumptions were stress tested in June of 2024 and they failed. So when you signed that off, what assurance did you have that it would work?
I tell you what we had, Jace. We had Lara Tumas, who told us that she had a plan B and that it would be rolled out on different areas and tested. What you haven't done is tested it until it went live in June. And 46,000 houses went live with people who worked in areas for years, were in other areas on rounds that didn't know the areas. That's a fundamental flaw. I don't need an investigation to that. It is quite clear that those errors of judgment and assumptions, which you've had 2.5 years to watch over, so to go back to 2018 and 2022, I think is rather weak, to be honest, if that's your comeback.
It's not weak at all, and I'll tell you why it's not weak, because we have, as you have acknowledged, we've apologised that this has happened on our rounds. And you know what? In those 2 years, perhaps we should have relooked your assumptions. We didn't. So that's us being a bit self-critical. We have stood up and apologised and accepted the criticism. You're talking today about the assumptions of a business plan failing. Those assumptions were in the main, probably in the whole, in the business case that your cabinet signed off. They were. And that's where we are today. And you know what? What I would say is, and again, it's not being critical, because hindsight is a wonderful thing. And in the 2 years, perhaps we should have said, well, you know what? This will take some more money. But if you'd have put the extra resources in, if you'd have put 28 rounds instead of 21, you'd have put more lorries, more wagons than we originally had back in June. And if you'd put the resources in then, front-ended the resources, and let's be honest, at a time when the council was not as cash-strapped as it is now, then perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here. Now, that's conjecture, and it's hindsight, and that's hindsight's an easy thing, but it's not acceptable for decisions you made to just, there's nothing here, walk on. We've accepted our responsibilities, and I think you should as well.
I'll accept anything I voted on, Jason, and I'll stand by what the last thing I voted on was about the finances for the, as Rhys mentioned about the employment in Denby. I never voted on any lorries or rounds, and I never did. And you can ask Tony that I haven't.
Well,
just fact telling you.
The business case, the figures and the papers from the May 2022 cabinet were particularly detailed around wagons, depots, and all the technical operational side of things. You know, I've read the papers, watched the webcast. You know, I'm content to stand by that, and I'm not abdicating responsibility at all. I've said it before. This happened on my watch, on our watch. We're dealing with it. That's what we're dealing with today.
But I'm offering you advice.
The decision we're making today to put the funding in to get this on a sustainable basis, so it works for our residents.
So by when will it be sustainable, Jason?
Heard detailed. You've heard detailed questions
When's the date?
from the members of my cabinet about that, and you've heard a detailed answer from Tony, who I'm going to bring in again. But we can't say the 30th of October. We can't say the 4th of November. We can say that we'll be working on this within a matter of weeks to get this right. It's, you know, it's what date do you want? 3rd of November? You know, what are you asking? We're giving you a detailed plan, which is going
it's not a plan without targets.
It's a plan. Tony, do you want to come in?
Yeah, Yeah, if I can, if it helps. I just, in terms of when will we be back in a position where we've got this, the situation I described earlier, where we've got 120, say, missed collections every week being reported. I'm not going to say at 11 a.m. on a particular date, then that's going to be, we'll move to that position. What I'm saying is that if there is a decision at Cabinet today, these new rounds can be implemented within weeks, and the plan is that during October we will be able to implement those new revised rounds. We need the decision in order to be able to finalise that planning. Once we roll out those rounds, I'm confident that within weeks, those new rounds will have settled down, so that I hope that we'll be in that position where things are running as business as usual again. This is a change, as I said before. I'm not, this isn't flicking a switch. Introducing these revised rounds is not like flicking a switch and everything's going to be perfect as soon as we do it. I have to be really clear about that. It's a change, and change brings issues. We're confident that we can deal with those issues, and within weeks of that change, things will have settled down. I'm not going to give you a date and a time of when we're going to be in that position where everything's okay again, but we are talking about weeks rather than months moving to that sustainable position.
Thanks, Tony.
Once we've implemented.
Yeah, in fairness, you had already answered that, so thanks. Okay. I'm going to bring Terry in.
Thank you, Leader. I wasn't around in 2018, so it's not my fault. But I have two questions. They're nothing to do with the pounds that's going to be rubber stamped here today, and that's very clear. But I'd like to bet anyone around this table a couple of shillings that we'll be back here in 6 months, and they're probably going for another million. Now, this extra million that will be earmarked for extra staff and extra rounds, the briefing we had on Thursday was this would negate the need for agency staff and for other staff being dragged in from other DCC departments, and taking those away from their normal DCC duties. So as I understand it, under this new model and under your assumptions, or the new assumptions, wherever they're coming from, you will have dedicated staff with dedicated trucks, etc. Yeah. So with this new model, will you have the same staff collecting on the same routes on the same day of each week, so that they can have the familiarity that's been lacking in the last 4 months, so that we end up like our local postie, and they know where the houses are. Now, if you don't do that, particularly in rural areas, you'll still have missed collections, just like the one I've put on the system 7 times. Now, I understand you said you were always going to get missed collections, but hopefully, if you implement the same people on the same routes, that will reduce dramatically, I would think. That's just logic. Secondly, a second question, let me take you to Appendix B, page 31, paragraph 3, which incur additional costs from residents. It's regarding the green waste and the trade waste contracts. With paragraph 3, I'll read. It says it's regarding the reimbursement customers who've received a poor service, and then this issue is quite complex and will take time to work through and confirm. Now, I believe that would have come from the finance department. This should not be complex at all, and it should be not, certainly shouldn't be kicked down the road, this subject of compensation. Customers, as in residents, have paid for green bins, and businesses have paid for trade waste services that haven't been collected. Now, you're a lawyer, Jason. Under consumer law, that's misrepresentation, false pretenses, fraud, I don't know. Breach of contract, maybe? I don't know. But it's clear that the residents have been paying for a service that they simply haven't been. Okay? So May I suggest a very simple and a very non-complex solution? That after the 4 months of chaos, of shambles, and all the other adjectives have been used over the last 4 months, this ineffective rollout, may I suggest a very simple and non-complex solution that you cancel all the direct debits from December to the end financial year end and 31st of March for all the green waste people and the trade waste businesses. Okay, and then now, if you do that, yes, I'll agree that some recipients of that service would be overcompensated. I agree with that. You know, they're going to get back or miss out on more money than, you know, when they should have. But that would be, for DCC, a gesture of goodwill. And let's be very clear, there hasn't been a lot of goodwill over the last 4 months, particularly to councillors. And that has been reflected in the recent turnout of the local election of 11.5%. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Terry. So a question there about staffing and the compensation scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is it going to be the same staff?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Terry. I completely agree with you. That's one of the keys for getting this, getting success with this service, is to get consistency, the same people working on the same rounds every week, familiarity with their route, and that's absolutely key, which is why we want to move to this position following this proposal today, which will enable us to employ more people, more drivers and more loaders directly, instead of relying on the number of agency staff that we're currently using. So I totally agree with you. That's what we need to do. And clearly that's the thing that will help us to improve in those areas we've been struggling. So you're absolutely right. So I just wanted to clarify that nobody from outside of the waste service is collecting waste on behalf of the waste service, that we're not using people from other services to collect waste, you know, to complete these rounds. No, that's not happening. So that did happen, but on a very, very small number of people for a period of time. And I did say, yeah, I did say on average how many people a week were being used, and I think it was 3 people on average per week were being utilised who had volunteered to support. So it was very, very small scale. It's not happening now. I just wanted to highlight that for clarity. I don't think we're going to be debating today and making, you know, and agreeing what the solution is for people who've had an inconsistent green collection service since the start of the rollout. It is an issue that needs to be resolved. Councillor Mendes is absolutely right. It will be, it's not being kicked down the road, but today isn't, I don't think today is the day for debating and agreeing the solution on that. Councillor Mendes has highlighted the potential problem with a blanket approach, and that is that we compensate people who have been having a very good service since the start of the rollout, and that's maybe not a good use of money. But I say it's not, I don't think it's for today, Leader, that question.
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations about the balance between, are you overcompensating, but the element of goodwill as well. So it's an important point. Take that on board. Thank you.
So you will be looking at that, and I would suggest strongly that it would be cheaper to do a blanket block cancellation, if that's the right word, than trying to work out if Mrs. Jones got a green bin.
If you start.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Terry. Bobby, do you want to come up? Just looking at the screen. No hands up.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, can I just say that over the last 4 months, I felt more as if I'm the villain of the piece here. The attitude to questioning and criticism has all too often been defensive and irritated rather than understanding and trying to give answers. Surely, as a backbencher, it is my duty to the citizens I represent to relay the frustration, inconvenience, and in some cases, real anguish, all caused by the indefensible incompetence of a botched rollout of this new waste system. The decisions made over the last 2.5 years in the run-up to rollout were based on incorrect, as it turns out, assumptions. I believe there was a lack of proper planning, a lack of monitoring, and a lack of risk evaluation. The worst thing of all is that the council will almost certainly expect residents to pay even more council tax next year, even though they have had such a torrid time. This additional money request is not even allowed to be scrutinised. It will most likely be rubber stamped by this cabinet, and we don't even know if it will actually work. 8 more drivers, 8 more vehicles, 11 more loaders, 28 rounds instead of 20. As far as I can see, the problematic green waste system has not been addressed as yet. Today, you are asked to sanction another 2.4 million thereabouts to finance the changes for the new waste system and to try and get it to work efficiently and sustainably. And this is all on top of the miraculous 1.2 rebate received from the Waste Partnership to pay off money spent over the last 4 months of the disastrous rollout. As far as I can see from this report, there is still no proper business case, certainly no time for proper scrutiny, and not even a timeline for implementation. And I think it's a disgraceful state of affairs. Can I just ask these questions? If implemented successfully this time, will it still save the 500,000 per annum on the original system, where we were paying too much, as Tony's corrected me many times now? Sorry for saying savings, but that's how it came across to me at the time. And will we reach the required 70% carbon target? Why didn't we ask Welsh Government for money earlier? And what is the latest tally of our prudential borrowing? It used to be relatively safe and stable. I'd like to know what it is now. I'd also like to know what is planned to try and help staff through this further change to the waste system. Not just those who work in waste, who must be having a dreadful time as well, but all those other staff, particularly in comms, where they've had to deal with all these queries. Their morale must be on the floor.
Liz wants to come in. I'm going to come in on a couple of points. I've consistently acknowledged the pressures that we're all under as individual members, whether we're the leader or a backbencher. We're all under those pressures. I acknowledge that, I thank you for dealing with them. I'm going to take issue with the word and the phrase rubber stamped. I'm going to take strong issue with that, because you sat at the back there for over an hour, a number of challenging questions from the members of the cabinet. Those discussions have been happening behind the scenes.
Okay, I'll take that back straight away.
Okay.
And wait and see what the result is.
Well, you are then now indicating that if we vote for this, we're rubber stamping it, and that's what I'm taking issue about. We're not rubber stamping it. We're not rubber stamping a document. It's looking at it for a second, stamping it, and pushing it on to the next one. That's why I'm taking issue, because we're not doing that. Had an hour's worth of questions, and that's basically the tip of the iceberg, because there's been some intensive discussions. Member scrutiny, we set aside a whole afternoon to deal with this and the terms of reference of the scrutiny of the system. We didn't even get to the scrutiny of the rollout system, because we spent the whole time dealing with this. So I would dispute that there's been no member involvement at all. I'd strongly dispute that. We're going to be soon looking at the scrutiny process, and I'm sure within the scrutiny process again, we'll be looking at it in its totality, which will include this process as well. So to say there's been no member input is wrong. This is a decision under the Constitution.
I said no formal scrutiny.
Okay, well, there is a formal scrutiny. Gary's looking at me now. He doesn't need to tell me. It's the 24th of October. Okay, for the formal scrutiny. Okay, well, if we don't make this decision today, this is why we've got it here today. We're not going to wait till the end of October or November. Hugh was asking, give us a date. Give us a date when it's going to. Well, it'd be even later if we made this any later. So we have to make that decision today. We are not rubber stamping. Okay, I'm going to bring Liz in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about adding the two numbers together to get to 2.4 million. I think that's a bit dangerous.
Well, initially I put it separate.
Yeah, no, so because we're talking about two different, I know, members of the public are watching this, and therefore it's important that we're careful in how we articulate. So just to explain, you know, we are talking about a capital sum of money of 1.3 million and then a revenue sum of money of 1 million. Of course, we are going to need to borrow for that capital sum of money, and that will need to be repaid through borrowing. So that repayment is in that revenue sum. So if we add them together, it gives a misleading picture. So there are borrowing, the repayment of borrowing is included within that revenue, which will be done over a number of years, over 7 years. So I just think it's important we don't quote that figure. They're separate for a reason. So I
do understand that. As I say, I had it separate, put it together for brevity.
Some specific questions. I know that Ellen did mention the targets, 70%, and that Barry touched on that. But if you have some questions, Tony, can you come in and answer Bobby's questions, please?
Yeah, certainly. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer them all. The thing about the £500,000, the £500,000 saving, just wanted to be clear about that. We never said that this project was going to release a saving of £500,000. But as we've described already, there was a revenue pressure on the waste service prior to this rollout, i.e. it was already over budget. We did say that we projected the new service would reduce the cost of the waste service by hopefully £500,000. So it was about reducing the budget pressure on the service. It was not about releasing a saving. That was always been made clear in all the reports that we've brought to Cabinet, and that's been part of the debate. So as I've said before, the budget for the waste service in 23-24 was 7.2 million. The cost of the waste service was 8 million that year. So it was overspending to the tune of 800,000. We're clear, and that's why we're bringing this report today, that the new model that was introduced in June is not going to reduce that budget pressure by £500,000 as we hoped it would. That's very clear. So we've already said, you know, the assumptions that were made around that model have not proved to be correct. And one of those is about that service costing £500,000 less than it did before. So we need to understand that we're very clearly saying now that we will not reduce the cost of the waste service by £500,000 with this new model, because we underestimated the number of recycling rounds that were required. We need more, which means more vehicles, more drivers, and more loaders. Now, there's been lots of talk about and kind of criticism about the term, about things being based on assumptions throughout the meeting today. And I just wanted to pick up on that, Leader, if I may, because all services, all new services are based on assumptions. Now, they have to be, because they don't exist before the service is introduced. So it is always theoretical until the point in time that the service is rolled out. What we now have is 4 months of experience and evidence about what that service works like in real life. And that is why we're bringing this paper here today, to rectify that situation that exists where we underestimated the number of recycling rounds that were needed for this service. Now, whichever way you want to kind of, explain that, whichever language you use, that is very simply the situation. The day for debating why that happened and the reasons why that happened are not for today, they're for the scrutiny process. This is about acknowledging that that situation exists. We underestimated the number of recycling rounds we need, and this is about providing the solution to make that service work again. So the other debate is for another day. Will we reach 70%? I think I've covered that already. It's early days, but the signs are promising. And we knew one thing for sure: we were not going to reach 70% with the old model. We've been using that old model for more than a decade, and we'd been operating around about 65% for about a decade. It wasn't changing. So we know that for sure. We're optimistic that this new model will still help us to get to 70%. As I say, it's early days in terms of the evidence on that yet. Why didn't we ask for money from Welsh Government earlier in the process? Well, we've done that at several points throughout this process, throughout this project since 2018. We've been back to ask Welsh Government for additional financial support. To be fair to Welsh Government, they've responded positively throughout at various points throughout the project, and they've contributed, I think, more than £12 million to this project. So, we will be making that formal request again. We hope that that will be received favourably. We don't know though yet, and we know that things are difficult, which is why the figures in this report are based on the assumption that we have to fund it ourselves, because we have to assume that in case that turns out to be the case, because you need to be making a decision with that full knowledge of that of the information that's before you. And at the moment, we don't know whether we will be able to lever in any additional Welsh Government money, which is why we're assuming that we have to pay for it ourselves. I'm not particularly keen on terms words like incompetence being used regularly, I've got to say, Leader, in relation to this. As I say, today is not the day for discussing why things didn't work out as we hoped they would. But I personally think incompetence is a strong term, and I would actually request that we refrain from using those kinds of terms, and at least until we've been through a scrutiny process. I can't remember if there are any more questions.
There
Bobby.
was staff. Are we going to try and do something to help staff morale,
Okay.
particularly the comms and reception, and also your own waste staff?
I'll certainly pick that conversation up with the relevant head of service or heads of service in that case. Obviously, that covers more than one area. I have to say that I'm based pretty much all the time at the moment in the waste depot in Denbigh. I have been for the past 4 months. I see the staff every day. I don't see a big problem with morale in terms of the waste service. The staff are getting used to the new service now. It is starting, even though we know we haven't got the resource we need to turn this into the business as usual sustainable service that it needs to be. The staff are getting used to the job and the way of working, and I speak to the crews all the time. I don't see a problem with morale.
Tony. Okay. Graham, do you want to?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Thanks, Lee. I haven't said much to date, but obviously Tony and Elizabeth have answered most of the questions. What I would say from what I've heard to date, it has been a test for us all. I think that's absolutely right. We understand that. I mean, the lead member said it didn't go as well as clearly it was planned, the rollout, and that has resulted in a test for us all. Members, local members, cabinet, senior officers, myself, Tony, staff in the call centre, staff in the depot, the guys on the front, all the staff on the front line. It's definitely been a test for us all. More importantly, of course, it's been a test for the residents. We understand that. and we've worked really hard to try and get it right. And in that, we've had lots of questions. And I know, Bobby, you said that there's been some defensiveness around that, and we apologise from an officer perspective. We want to try and be open and honest, which is why, again, we're here today to try and explain what the situation is, try to explain what the extra budget is required to put right some of the assumptions that were wrong. Members themselves will, of course, lead on that, on the scrutiny of why those things went wrong, and the public will be involved in that. I've heard the lead member and the leader say they welcome that scrutiny, as do I, because we're a learning authority. We will learn from those mistakes and we'll learn from those errors, not just in the waste team, but of course in terms of project management more broadly. So it has been a test, and we wouldn't want to be seen to be defensive. I suppose sometimes that's just human nature, because it's been very testful. We've all been under stress and pressures, as have the members as well. And I absolutely understand, and I've seen some of those stresses as well. Sometimes, of course, we've not been able to give you the answers that you want. The question is, when will it be right? What day will it be right? And I think Tony's given a good answer for that. He said it will be a matter of weeks, but it really is difficult to say it will be a set date, because by giving it a set date, of course, you're setting yourself up to fail if you're a day or two after that, and there's a lot of moving parts here. And so again, we apologise that sometimes we've not been able to give you the answers that you're looking for from a member perspective. Similarly, I know there's been concerns about the AHP and the rollout of that. Now, that's been difficult for us because of limited resources. Of course, we'd want to roll that out quicker, but there have been limited resources, and we've had to try and focus on getting on top of the things that we've had to get on top of over the last couple of months. And I think that we have done. So I know it's been a difficult time for us. It's not something any of us wanted. I know it's been a difficult time for the residents, which is the most important thing here, but for members. And officers have worked hard to try and get on top of this. But that has created tensions, and we understand that. But we're not here to be defensive. We're here to try and answer those questions. But sometimes there aren't answers to some of those questions, and but we've tried our best to explain the context within that. You've touched on staff. Of course, it's an important fact. It's one of our 5 principles. Of course, we want to support staff. That's staff at all levels, because there has been stress for staff in some of this. The call centre, in the depot, and we've got to make sure we provide the appropriate support for staff. But of course, they're not the only services that are under pressure. A lot of our services are under pressure. Social services are under pressure. Budget overspend of over £8 million in social services. We've had to put £8 million into adult social services this year. An extra £2 million of adult in children's services. That's an extra £10 million of budget that's gone into social services. That's because of the increase in the demand and the increase in the complexity, and those staff are under pressure as well. So of course we want to support those staff to make sure that they can provide the right services, because there are a number of services under pressure in the authority. The last thing I'd say, returning back to this service, the waste service, and I turn to paragraph 419 in the report, and I'm going to read it out because I think it's important, because a lot of what the issues today have gone beyond the brief of the report, and I absolutely understand why that is. So it's not a criticism, absolutely understand why. This is a complex service area with a number of financial risks. Costs and income will vary from year to year, dependent on market forces and other variables. We therefore need to continue to monitor the budget and ensure the service is running efficiently. This can be picked up in regular monthly finance reports to Cabinet, because we have those regular finance reports where we report where services are overspending, so they'll be in there. And actually there may be a need for further Cabinet reports in the future. And a lot of these issues, if members are really concerned about them, of course, I'd encourage you to also use the option of going to the chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny and ask for those issues to be looked at and scrutinised at scrutiny. Today is a Cabinet decision about additional money. It's not a scrutiny committee, but you have the option to go to scrutiny. Of course, I've already touched on the fact that scrutiny is going to deal with the what went wrong, and will be involved the public, and we'll see. I will personally make sure that that is an open and transparent process. But it is incumbent upon members to call these issues into scrutiny around this service and other services, like any service, because it is a complex service. It's not a service without its difficulties, and it's not a service without its budget pressures beyond what we've just talked about today. So I hear a lot of what members have said. We understand that. We are sympathetic to the issues you've been putting. I think everybody in this room, in the end, has Denbighshire County Council's best interest at heart. have the residents' best interest at heart, and we are trying really hard to make sure that we can provide the service in the way that Tony's described that goes back to where the waste service was 6 to 12 months ago, when no one really knew it existed, but 46,000 households a day were getting a really good service. And of course, that's where we need to be, and that's where we want to be. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Okay, Barry, as lead member, you wanted to come in, and
Yeah.
then Emrys wants to speak as well, yeah?
Thanks, Leader.
Yeah, I've got Brian first. And then
I just want to touch on the staff morale. Before I became can I speak, please? Pardon? God blimey, you don't have to worry me, you do. As an ex-general manager for Arriva, working out of Rill, Llandudno, Bangor, Chester, Aberystwyth, I know what it's like to manage staff. And I call into the waste depot as many times as I can. I've been there this morning. And yes, there was morale problems with staff in the early days. They were getting it in the neck. Never mind me getting in the neck after it. I was more worried about the staff. And a lot of that had to, was down to having agency staff there. You're bound to have that conflict with agency staff. But now, I mean, I've been there this morning. There's such a change in that depot. The problems that was mentioned, some of the routes were wrong. I'll mention Prestatyn on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Very long routes. They wasn't getting finished. Those are two routes that are really going to be looked at. There's also routes during the week, because they're not all the same every day. During the week, there were smaller routes. And we're seeing now staff picking the phones up when they've got their routes finished, knowing that there's lads on bigger routes and asking, do they want help? And that's what's happening. When they're finishing, they're going over and they're helping them. Now, this change, by sorting those long routes out, that won't have to happen. The people on those routes will finish their routes at the time they should be doing. And that'll put us on the steady footing. I know there've been problems, especially, I feel sorry for the councillors in the south of the county, where they've been missed with the farmers up in the long lanes that go up there, whether it's end of lane collection and whatever. But I think a really important thing, once this is all over, and I've spoke to Tony already about it, I'd like to see a workshop for all members, maybe in the new year, to explain what goes on in this recycling depot. It's not just a depot, stuff gets dumped, it's all recycled. And how the routes work, so we get a proper understanding of it. And I think it'd be good for all members to do that. But as far as staff morale, especially at the depot I'm talking about, and I know what you're saying, Bobby, about the girls on the switchboard, I praise them, I really do. But I really can tell you, the staff at the depots is really coming back together. And I've seen that for myself this morning.
Thanks, Barry. That's really important that you said that about, we shouldn't lose sight of the staff who are working hard as we're here making these decisions. Thanks, Barry. Emrys, you wanted to come in as well.
Yes, please. I wanted to come in quite a while ago. This is for transparency. I'm doing it in English now. For Councillor Hilditch Roberts to say, I never voted on any vehicles. Well, you were in attendance on the 23rd of November 21. Tender of new fleet vehicles for the new waste model. And then it says, Councillor Brian Jones presented the report seeking Cabinet approval to the proposed tendering exercise to identify a main contractor to deliver fleet vehicles to support the waste model for household trades and communal waste collections. I could carry on as more. The paper, the commissioning form was signed by Councillor Brian Jones at that time. There was one little proviso, they had to come back to January 2022. And in 2022, the agreement to award the contract with immediate effect. I don't think you were absent there either, Councillor Hilders Roberts, because you had 100% attendance in your cabinet meeting in any case. And if you are surprised about not having a call-in period after today, Councillor Feely, on the 23rd of November 21, there was a no call-in period. And the same again on the 18th of January 22. It's not new. It just happened before, not just with this cabinet. Thank you.
Thanks, Emrys. And I could add here, I'm looking at the March 2022, the figures, the business case, the depot, 11.215 million, fleet, 3.6 million, containers, 3.4 million, all fully costed. But as it happens, not enough. Didn't work. That's why we're here now. Hugh, I'm going to let you in because Emrys has mentioned you and you've got a right to reply. Then I'm going to bring in Brian, and I got Martin on the screen. And is that a hand up from Andrea? Yeah. You know what that.
Let's for clarity. The proposed new waste and recycling service design and associated infrastructure depot requirements is what I voted on. I didn't vote on a single round or a single collection. I voted on the purchase of the land and the depot and the infrastructure and the fleet that was needed for there. But there's nowhere in your minutes, Emrys, that says that I voted on any rounds or rubber stamped any collections on trolley boxes or general waste on per town or per city or per village. That's my general point. And that original passing in 2018, December. So there's been 5 years since then. And therefore there has been 3, maybe 4 different waste managers in that time, if I'm right, Tony?
I think we're getting into the...
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, Jason, that the clarity is, I have never voted on any of these rounds, which you are voting on today. Let's get the clarity. I voted on the bigger picture, and you were inaccurate in saying that.
Well, I don't think I was, and I think the papers will bear me out on that. And you know what? I think the scrutiny process will be, and I think we are now moving into...
Well, tell me what rounds I voted on, Jason. If you've got that information, share it.
We're moving into the scrutiny. Well, you know, it's all in the business case here that's before me. You know, the depot, the fleet, the container.
Yeah, that's the depot and the fleet, but it doesn't mention per round.
It's reserved, you know.
It doesn't mention per round. I've never denied, so you were incorrect.
Well,
on the concept.
If it does look what we
and
don't
the
want,
infrastructure,
what people don't want is to see me and you having a spat. Okay.
Well, don't put false things out then. Stick to what's in the paper, and I'll be happy with it.
The business case in March 2022 and earlier, as we've heard in quite detail from Emrys, referred to the funding. And what I'm saying today is we're going to have to put additional funding in because it hasn't worked. The fleet, it wasn't enough. These are issues for the scrutiny. I've let you come in and have your right of reply because Emrys mentioned you in person.
But you inherited a costed business plan at that time when you took the keys of the office.
Which didn't work.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't in charge of it, was I?
You said we inherited it, so we inherited it from who? But anyway, we're getting into...
That's how it works, isn't it?
We can get into conjecture on the scrutiny process, which, as I said, I welcome, and we can take a deep dive into this. I'm just going to bring you in quickly.
Yes,
We've got
please.
Brian, Martin and Andrea.
I'm sure we should have this discussion outside this meeting, but your words were, I never voted on any vehicles. Look, right, you didn't mention rounds at all. Now then, if you order 20 vehicles, I suspect there are 20 rounds somewhere as well involved with that, but that's by and by. You were there when you did vote for that proposal then on the 23rd of November 21, and it was all confirmed on the 18th of January 22, agreement to award the contract with immediate effect.
I'm agreeing with you.
I'm going to stop both of you. I'm going to stop both of you and say that we're here to make a decision to rectify the rounds, and what the public don't want to see is a spat between 2 members in Ruthin, because this will come out in the scrutiny process. Okay, thank you. Brian.
Well, just for clarity, the chief executive said about scrutiny. This is all going to go to scrutiny. Will the scrutiny committee be able to make a recommendation back to cabinet?
Are we talking about the 24th of October scrutiny?
The 24th of
Yeah,
October
absolutely.
scrutiny.
Scrutiny committees can make recommendations to Cabinet. And if scrutiny committees make formal recommendations to Cabinet, Cabinet is obliged to consider those recommendations. So any recommendations that Cabinet made would be reported back to Cabinet.
Good, okay. And next one up then is these new routes. Are you planning to speak to the local members who they might affect? Because perhaps the local member might have some information or might be able to see a flaw, if that's the right word. So would you consider going to the local members who will be affected by the new rerouting?
Okay, thanks, Brian. We have discussed this in the team and we've considered it. We were debating what information we would give to the members to be able to have that discussion, and it would be obviously all members would have to provide, and what it would really come down to would be providing all members with the detail of all the streets and all the properties that are on a particular round. Now, we're more than happy to provide that information to members if members would find that useful, and if it would enable members to provide us with some feedback on that or some thoughts, we're more than happy to do it. It's quite a big and detailed task, but if that's something that members would like us to do, then I'm sure we could facilitate it.
Right, my thinking is keeping it simple. If a local member obviously knows or she knows his ward, we don't want to be creating time wasted with officers, but if there's just a high level look-see, the round's changing, it was 400 collections a day, now it's going to be 250 collections a day. They might, I'm not saying they will, they might have some input to maybe pick up a potential blip that could help, but I've raised it and I've been asked by members of the public
I'll
about
just
that.
come in, Tony, before I think there's a good, it's a good suggestion. So if we can do that, obviously it's resources and whatever. The only caveat, I guess, is that not all the rounds are within wards, so it becomes more complicated because some rounds will go through multiple wards. So you'll have a round that might have a certain number of houses in one ward, a certain number of houses in another ward, and a certain number is another ward. So it'll be quite difficult to have that overview. But I still think it's a good suggestion. It was something I'll talk to Tony about, and if we can think about in what way we can present that information, so we can help members and members can help us.
Yeah, because the old general rule of thumb is if you're actuating change, do it from here up as opposed to from the top down. Okay, then we'll have a think about that and see where we might go with it. The 10.1 on the report, again, talking about the new routes, I wanted to ask a question. So RAP has been mentioned. So I'm not going to use that word. RAP have had an input into the new routes. And my question is, who else has had an input into these new routes? And was the consensus of opinion on these new routes, was it unanimous, or is there different points of view? And I'll put my hands up. It's a bit of a mischievous question because I've spoken to people. So without putting you on the spot, Tony, these new routes, is it unanimous from your side of the fence, staff, RAP, the workforce, or is there division on these new routes that, might still cause us a problem?
Okay, thank you, Brian. There's no division in the ranks or in the team in relation to the proposal. Everybody's comfortable and on board with what's being proposed in terms of the new rounds. Yes, RAP have been heavily involved in the process, but as I said earlier, it has to be owned by the service. So the most important thing is that the service itself is comfortable with the proposal that's been put forward, because it's the service that's going to have to continue to operate these rounds and this service after RAP have moved on to help another authority with another issue. So yes, they've definitely been heavily involved, but it's the service that needs to own it and be comfortable that this is the right thing.
Okay, well, I asked the question most sincerely because I don't want to see you in a position in 3 months' time where there's problems again, and I'm sincere with that, and I sincerely hope you've got it right, and that it does solve most of the issues. We know collections will be missed because they were on the previous system. So thanks for that response on that. And then my final point, having spent the last 3 weeks knocking on doors, the waste is on a lot of people's lists. You've congratulated Councillor Will Price coming to the chamber this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, and he doesn't understand what it's all about and how we've ended up where we are, because he's come from the residents' side of things, and there is that out there that you can't explain to residents why this has happened, and it just doesn't hold any water. We've all suffered reputational damage, whether you're on the back benches or you're sitting here as cabinet, and that's difficult to see how we can get up with that. People disillusioned and can't see an answer. So, not as a criticism, it would have been, I think, a relevant point in this paper today if there had been an indication when this will be affected, if all this extra spend is going to go through. Because in the private sector, Barry's mentioned about his days with Arriva, when I spent 9-10 years as a managing director supplying the motor industry, we had problems, monies were involved, putting the problems right, but you always had to give. And when will we see a return on the money, the investment? When will you put it right, Mr. Brian Jones, Managing Director? So, okay, thank you.
Good, all valid points, Brian. Wouldn't disagree with what you've said, and I'm sure Will, with you as his group leader, will be on a steep learning curve, and you'll show him the ropes very quickly, I'm sure. I don't know if there's any issues from what Brian has suggested. I mean, look, the date we've said at length. We're not going to say a specific date. Graham's addressed that. I've addressed it. It's a valid point. Tony, do you want to come in?
I think it's probably covered in with previous answers, Jason, and obviously we will pick up that issue, as Graham has said, around providing some information to members around the rounds, see what we can do. As Graham has highlighted, it's complex, but we can do something, I'm sure. Happy to pick that up.
Okay, because again, Mr. and Mrs. Resident, they're not into, we all know this, they're not really interested in the technicalities. They want to know, will the waste be collected? And so the obvious question is, well, if this is going through today, when will we be right? Back in July, we said 3 cycles, and this will be licked and in place. All right, that hasn't happened, but we're at another junction here now. So,
you're absolutely right, Brian. And I think, in fairness, Tony asked a question, I think, from Emrys earlier, that what they'll see is their bins collected on a proper regular footing, regular basis, as it should be. That's what we'll see. The public will see. Okay, good points there. Thanks, Brian. Okay, I've got Martin, who's been waiting patiently with his hand up on the screen, and then Andrea.
Okay, thank you, Leader. So I just wanted to clarify something. We've talked a lot about the assumptions made before and the assumptions we're going to make on these new rounds. So to clarify, previously we might have had to say it's going to take 2 minutes a house. There's 100 houses on this street, therefore 200 minutes to collect that street. And what we can do now, we've been collecting these streets with the new trucks, with the in-cab system, and we should actually know how long it takes to collect a street or a house or an area. We should also know much more information, hopefully, about how much waste we are collecting from those streets. So whereas before it was quite a sort of generalized average assumption, now it's based on actual data. So I'm hoping, I don't want to say assuming, I'm hoping that the estimates are going to be much more accurate because it's based on actual data. Will we be able to tell at the end of day one on a new round? We should know instantly how close we were to getting that round correctly, and we should be able to report on this quite easily, I assume. Tony, your guys should know at the end of day one or the end of week one, hopefully, you should be able to look at these new rounds and know and be able to report back to members, yeah, this is working. Our assumptions were correct. So that's my first question really. Have I got that correct? That we're basing these on actual data, not assumptions, and can we report back to members quickly and should know straight away? And the other thing I wanted to ask, obviously we've had a big hit on reputation to this council rolling this system out. I've scanned through the risk register, the corporate risk register, and I can't see anything that covers this. I don't think it should be actually mentioned specifically on the risk register, but I don't see a risk that covers, how would you word it, not making incorrect assumptions on a project plan. Should we have something in there on the risk register that ensures for further service change project rollouts that we can better stress test any assumptions that the business case has been based on? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hogg. Yeah, I think you've articulated probably what I was trying to say earlier, but in a much better way. When I was saying that we've been able to learn from the experience of the first 4 months. Yeah, you're right. You know, we're working on the evidence and the data of what's actually happened. So, whereas the original model was based on those assumptions and it was more theoretical, we've now seen exactly what happens and how long it does take each of the rounds, because you know it obviously varies street to street, area to area. You know, it's not the same across the whole county. So we've been looking at what's actually been happening on each of the rounds on every day. So that's why we've got a lot more confidence that this model is going to work, because it's based on real life experience, evidence and data and what's been happening. So I agree with you. Yes, you're also right. We should know at the end of week one, we'll have had a full day of each day of the week. So we'll have done Monday to Friday. We'll have a really good idea of how well that's worked on, after week one. So, and I know everybody will be, once we've put a date on that implementation, everyone will be looking really closely at how we get on day one and on week one. So yes, I fully intend that we will be providing updates to members at the end of each day on that first week to see how it's going. And we're very confident that week one will look nothing like week one of the rollout on the 3rd of June, because it was really clear that week that things were not working well. So we will do that. Do you want to, Graham, do you want to come in on the risk register?
We'll pick up on the point of risk. I'll ask Gary to come in, but you're right, Martin. Obviously, we do a project, so the project has a risk register onto an individual project. So any project that we do follows the council's methodology for projects. So there'll be a project risk register there. Services have risk registers, so this will have been in a service risk register as well. And we do have the corporate risk register, and the corporate risk register is probably quite generic in some ways, and we'll talk about services, ask Gary to come in. But there may be a point of extra learning around assessments, etc., when rolling out big projects or transformational projects. And we, as I've said before, we're a learning authority. We've got some transformational projects in front of us that we would like to talk to members about, not just cabinet or members, throughout of the budget process. So there'll be risks in there, and perhaps it needs to evolve something in our corporate risk register. But Gary, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, please.
No, not much, but just a little bit. In terms of every project's got its risk register, every service has a risk register, and we have the corporate risk register. The corporate risk register is currently going through its sort of 6-monthly review, and there'll be a report going to Governance and Audit Committee and to Performance Scrutiny Committee in November, or it's certainly going to Governance and Audit Committee in November, and it'll be going through that cycle. And clearly, when we do the review at this point, then we do need to learn the lessons that we've learned so far from this project. Clearly, the scrutiny review will provide a more detailed set of learnings for us, but we can look at whether or not we need to be more specific in the corporate risk register about this type of event, and accept what Martin says. It's not specifically about this service, but it is about the risk to major projects not achieving what they're supposed to achieve. And we'll certainly take a look at that in the current review.
Andrea, and then Hugh Irving has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just bringing it back to the paper and what the recommendations are and what the Cabinet members have been asked to vote on today. I'm troubled about it insofar as I understand, there's currently 31 rounds being undertaken out there at the moment with the bought-in help of staff and hired vehicles. Yet this money is being sought to replace that hired-in staff and vehicles with ones we own. That's my summary of it. But will that actually fix the problem of the waste? I understand it'll fix the problem of the money and the people and the vehicles, but will it fix the waste? With 31 rounds we've got going on at the moment, it's not working. We've got the garden waste still not sorted. We've got people without hygiene bins. We've got textile bags, still no sign of those. We've got assisted collections still awry, and surplus bins scattered around that still we've got no plans for picking up. So this, I would understand this more if we were at a stage today where everything's working great, but it's not. So are we being asked to spend this money on just standing still, or even a situation that may get worse because we're going from 31 rounds as of today down to 26 to 28 in the plan? So my concern is, are we spending money just to stand still on a system that might cost us less extra but will still not be fixed? Are we throwing money, good money after bad, is my real worry today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. So, I mean, we've gone into detail on the plan to get this sustainable, and there's no real options. We can't go back to the old bins, and we need to put this money in to make the new system work. Great point about the rounds. It's a good question. Tony, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to.
Andrea's right. You
yeah.
go in from,
Yeah.
figures are changing. So can you address that?
Yes. What we're asking for approval for today is the resource to enable us to move to a permanent, sustainable position. Now, we're really confident that this plan that we have for these revised rounds provides that permanent, sustainable position where we can have a service that will run as a business as usual service like we had before, with a number of miscollections every week that we will always get, but the numbers being manageable and we can address them. The position we're currently in is a temporary solution. We had to put that plan in place at quite short notice because we were at a point where we had to respond as a council, because we had, as Councillor Mello was saying before, an unacceptable amount of miscollections across the whole county. We had to respond to that. So we had to put additional resource in, and that was done, as I say, at short notice. And we didn't have the luxury of being able to plan that over a long period of time in the most efficient and effective way. We just needed to get back on top of things, get the waste off the streets, and get on top of our collections. So that's what we did. The 31 rounds is a little bit of a red herring, because what we've done, we've got basically the equivalent of 31 vehicles going out every day. They're going out to support different rounds where we know the round has a problem, that maybe another round will go and support that round, that kind of thing. They're not clearly defined routes in the way that we're talking about here. When we talk about 26 to 28 recycling routes per day, they're very well defined routes. Everyone, and as Councillor Mendes was saying before, we want to get to the position where each of those routes has got their own vehicle, which is a Denbighshire owned vehicle that we know is of good quality and we can rely on it. It has a driver who's familiar with that round because they're on that round every week, so they don't change. Obviously, we do have people, you know, who are away on leave and people who are off, who are sick for whatever reason, and we end up having to bring in a temporary person to replace them. That does happen. That will happen in future, but everybody will be allocated to their specific route so that they'll be familiar with it, and they you know, they get used to that round. So that's the plan that we're talking about now. Those routes have been meticulously planned so that they are efficient. So that's why we're able to move to a position where we're actually using fewer resources than we're currently using, and we're still confident that it will work and it will be better than what we've currently got. We are successfully completing the majority of our recycling collections currently, but we do still have issues with some areas and some locations that are still having an inconsistent service. Moving to these new rounds will enable us to iron out those issues as well. And the other thing it will do, because it enables us to move to this position where we've got a service that works as business as usual, it frees up all of our back office and management support to address other issues that we still know we need to address, which is what the appendix to the report is, and it's reference to things like the rolling of the bins and the AHP and the green and everything else. So much of the management resource over the last 4 months has been focused on getting the recycling rounds completed, that it doesn't enable us to focus on other things that need to be addressed as well. So that this proposal will enable us to do that. I'm absolutely confident that's the case.
Good, and that's crucial, Tony. Let me stress as leaders today, absolutely crucial. Andrew has raised a good question now, the number of rounds and those rounds which are persistently, because I'm getting the same emails, and it's absolutely vital that we have to get that right, because it's unacceptable that there's been some addresses in the county who have been persistently missed. And I've talked about, well, we've had a high rate, but I've also talked about, in fairness, for the percentage that aren't collected, it's not acceptable. So stress that this business case needs to address that. I'm confident it will, Tony, from the lengthy discussions we've had. Okay. Do you want to come back in, Andrew?
Just very quickly,
Yeah, sure.
thank you, Leader. Thank you, Tony. I think we need to not lose sight of the fact that this paper and this money is about the whole waste system and not just recycling. I think we focus far too much on that. And this money, we should all be expecting to fix everything that's a part of the waste system. And I find it difficult to believe from this paper that it will, I'm afraid. Thank you.
I know, I mean, sorry, I was just going to say, Julie, as lead member for Equality, she did raise some important points like that yourself about the AHP bins, and you know, Julie, I know, has been really challenging and putting the pressure on the department on that. Tony, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this proposal today is specifically about resources for our recycling rounds, because we don't have sufficient recycling rounds currently to do the job to provide that service to 46,000 households. We do believe that we've got sufficient resources to deliver our residual service to all the residents in the county and to the green and for the AHP We know that we don't have enough resource to deliver the recycling rounds. That's why this proposal is specifically about asking for additional resources to address the issues with the recycling rounds, because we need additional resource for that to address the issues.
Except that that's what the paper's about, but there's a bigger picture. And we need to be conscious of that. Okay.
Can I just add to that? So I'll go back to paragraph 419 in the report around sort of complex service. Number of financial risks, cost and income will vary, so there'll be reports that will need to come back at some point. We've got to keep monitoring the overall service. That will be through the monthly cabinet finance reports, and if we need to come back to cabinet, then of course we will do. But it is a complex service, and there are other issues that we need to be able to monitor and watch in terms of that wider budget. Thank you.
Hugh, you've been waiting patiently on the screen. Would you like to come in?
Is it me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. Thank you. I just wanted to very briefly, as I could, just say at 10:51 this morning, I received this 2-page email from a resident, very well thought out, very considered, scrupulously polite, but seems to know about the meeting today. So I don't know whether the papers have been in the public domain or not, but he's making the point quite strongly that in his view, I should be trying to encourage the cabinet, if you like, not to allocate any further funds to this project until such time as we've really bottomed out and understood the problems with rollout Mark 1, if I can call it that. Now, I can't agree to that, but I just have to say that what we have done today, or what you've done today, you're going to redesign the rounds, you're going to acquire more vehicles and employ more operatives. If that works, fine. It's still costing us a lot more than it was anticipated, but if it doesn't work, as Andrea has just said, I'm concerned that we are pouring more money down a black hole. And that's something that isn't going to be acceptable to the general public, the residents, the members, or everybody concerned. So I just hope that that this, in fact, does work, and we don't have to be sitting here again in this rather painful meeting today. In fact, the positive, shall we say, the examination of what's gone wrong in the past is a matter for scrutiny. We'll look forward to getting it in front of the relevant scrutiny committee. But, you know, it has just got to work. So I just hope that this is actually a well-calculated assumption, not a well-calculated plan, and not a wild assumption, that it's something that's built on fact and not a triumph of hope over reality. And I just hope that that is actually the case, because like every other member, I am tired. I'm tired of being battered, if you like, by members of the public, by in person, on the telephone, by email. And it really doesn't, the whole reputation of Denbighshire, as Brian has just said, is really very, very much damaged. So I just hope that you've got all your calculations correct this time round.
Thanks, Hugh. Just to clarify, Hugh, just on your opening remarks, this is a cabinet meeting to make this decision, which we felt needed to be made today, not at the meeting at the end of the month. And so as a cabinet meeting, it's in the public domain. Papers are in the public domain. So fair play to the resident who's contacted you, whoever he or she may be, has had a look at the papers and come to a view, and that's absolutely fair enough. I don't think it's the right view, because if we don't put funding in to put this on a sustainable basis, as we've for the last 2.5 hours, we've heard the consequences of not doing it and the costs of continuing on the basis we are, and that, I think that really addresses your wider point as well. So, yep, thanks for that, Hugh, and thanks for that, raising those points. Thanks. Sorry, I can't see any other hands up. So we will go to the recommendations. I'd like to thank all the members for the debate and contributions today. This is an extremely important decision. Tony, you've heard the concerns of members. You've heard my concerns as leader. You've given us the confidence that the detailed plan, data-based, is going to put this on a sustainable footing. That's the decision we're making today. Okay, I will pass on to Barry as lead member for the recommendations, and then we'll go to the vote. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Leader. Cabinet 3.1, that the Cabinet approve an additional 1.299 million in capital expenditure for the purpose of procuring additional recycling vehicles funded by prudential borrowing. 3.2, that Cabinet approves an additional 1.067 million of revenue cost in order to ensure the service chains can deliver as planned on a sustainable footing. This includes the revenue cost for the prudential borrowing for the vehicles referred to in 3.1. 3.3, that Cabinet agrees that the decision be implemented immediately without calling, in accordance with section 7.25 of the Council Constitution. And 3.4, that Cabinet confirms they have read, understood and taken account of the wellbeing impact assessment at Appendix A as part of its consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Do we have a proposer that we accept those recommendations proposed by Councillor Julie Matthews, seconded by Councillor Rhys-Thomas? Can we vote all in favour, please? Okay, that's unanimous. That's carried. Thank you. Thanks. One agenda item, so we'll end the meeting there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.